Hello everybody, welcome to another Virgin Radio movie special with me, Jamie East, and I'm dead excited to be talking about this film. It's the film which is basically about the biggest band in the world and actually how hard they worked and how much they kind of expected it as well. It's Coldplay, A Head Full of Dreams, and the man that made it is sat with me, Mat Whitecross. How are you, sir?
I'm good, thank you very much for having me on.
I watched this, I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I read some reviews. I think a lot of people are angry that they can no longer continue to dislike Coldplay. Does that make sense?
Maybe,
because
I don't know.
I mean, they do get a lot of stick. They,
Yeah,
you know, historically,
sure.
they're an easy band to dislike. But actually, having watched the film and seen, I guess the graft that's been put in,
Right.
and you know they go great pains to kind of say, look, this is not some big kind of corporate conglomerate kind of machine. This is still kind of like about 6 or 7 blokes. It's just that the peripheral numbers have increased.
Yeah.
And that's the key thing I took away. Tell me about, you know, for those that haven't seen the film, take me through your involvement in it and how it came to be.
Well, it's a film, you know, it's a film I've wanted to make for over 20 years because I met the band before they were a band. So I met them at uni. Within a few hours of arriving in London, I think we were, you know, doing the usual rituals of grabbing suitcases and walking up and down staircases and, you know, kind of putting posters on the wall. And I bumped into 3 of the 4 within about an hour of being there, and everyone was helping each other out and saying hi. And I think Guy was the only person I didn't meet because he was in the next building. Yeah. I met him the week later or something like that. And we've been filming ever since, really. And I always wanted to be a filmmaker, so I happened to always have a camera on me, and I was slightly obsessive about shooting and documenting anything that happened, no matter how boring. And luckily I was surrounded by quite interesting things, including, you know, everything from student demonstrations and bands.
But you landed right on your feet. I'm going to be a filmmaker. I just happened to be filming, it's the creation of Coldplay, one of the world's biggest bands. I mean, fortuitous or what?
It was, yeah, it's unlikely. On the other hand, you know, there were 3 or 4 different bands and I filmed everyone. And I think, but within quite a short space of time, it became obvious that Coldplay were just the league above everyone else. And I think it was just they had this, like you said, they had a kind of drive and self-belief. But they had these tunes which I'd never heard before. And I hung out with bands just growing up a little bit, so I loved music and I loved being in that world. Not being a musician myself, you know, it's a great world to be on the periphery of. But having said that, hanging out with them, I was like, hang on, the music that they'd be playing, and it was often Chris or Will playing on their own. I said, this is better than the music that's in the charts. Like, that's not possible. You're supposed to be kind of playing versions of other people's songs.
You're supposed to be earning your stripes.
So I kind of figured it out pretty quickly. But then the question is, will that actually translate into the outer world? Is it just going to be us, or are they really going to take over the world?
I mean, that's where most bands fail. I mean, there are so many points throughout the film where a lot of bands just kind of fall to the wayside. You know, there's the never getting from the pub gig. There's the never getting signed, or there's falling apart after the first album doesn't quite work, or there's kind of like the difficult second album, or in Coldplay's case, the difficult second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth album.
And first
album. Yeah. But what I got a sense was that they worked really hard at making it about the 4 of them. And, you know, in the music business kind of folklore, you know, there's always the thing, well, you know, you should always do it the Coldplay way. It doesn't matter who writes the song or who sings the songs. It's split equally, then there's no ego, there's none of this, there's none of that. And that really comes across here. Yeah,
well, it's funny because they took that from U2 and Radiohead, I think. Yeah. And I think they'd seen, well, I mean, case in point, I remember them talking about Oasis back in the day. And the way that, famously, Noel's been very clear about it. He's like, I write the song, so therefore I get my fair share, and they were keen that they would all collaborate on them, so it didn't matter who came up with the song, and often it was, and nearly always it's Chris who comes up with the first germ of it. Yeah. And it's only really been in the last album or 2 albums that it's come from the rest of the band as well, so now they actually really are splitting the duties in a slightly, you know, kind of more equal way, but they were just like, look, every band falls out over cash, that's not interesting to us, that's not why we're doing it, so we're not going to worry about it. And then luckily that all came later.
And from your point of view, you know, throughout this 20-year kind of building up this huge archive, the access you get is just incredible.
Right, yeah. Well, I was a mate, so they couldn't really tell me to switch the camera off. I mean, they did constantly, but I wouldn't listen.
Yeah, I mean, thank goodness you didn't. But I mean, there must have been points where, as a mate, you felt uncomfortable filming. Because there are some really uncomfortable moments in the film where they're discussing, I don't know, whether it's addiction or kind of like personal problems, or you know, there's Chris's marriage that's going through kind of horrific kind of times. There's all sorts of stuff going on there. Was there ever a kind of, did you ever feel as though, is there a bit of a grey area here?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a documentary filmmaker in general, you're kind of split 50-50 between half your brain trying to be.
But that must be even worse because they're your mates.
Yes, yeah, for sure. Although having said that, I mean, I filmed, you know, I started off making much more political films. I filmed one film called Moving to Mars, which actually later Chris then turned into a song, weirdly. But anyway, I wrote that.
Split equally?
Split. No, you can have that one. But Moving to Mars was about Burmese refugees coming to England, and I remember filming them and then recounting these terrible things that had happened to them. And you know, you have to go through this very strange process. Half your brain is saying, switch the camera off, let's go and comfort them, let's stop talking about these horrible things. And half of your brain is thinking, this is great. You know, this is gold dust. Oh, I hope they cry in a minute, which is a not a very nice thing to want to do, but that's part of the process, I suppose. And I've definitely felt that on this film with Coldplay, that there's moments you kind of feel uncomfortable. But luckily, I suppose I'm as much part of the furniture now as anyone, so they don't worry too much. The cameras are getting smaller, which is good.
Yeah.
A lot of times we end up filming on phones even, or they might shoot themselves.
Well, I mean, I would imagine back in the college days, it was an old mini DV.
It was a high 8 one. It was like this.
Wow.
It was not the best. It was my dad's camera basically that it lent me.
I wanted to ask you a question because obviously, you know, Supersonic was out. Was that last year or the year before? I think it was the year before, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You know, which was fantastic, very, very different to this.
Sure. Yeah.
Really, really good.
I'll
ask you about how you managed to kind of be both Coldplay and Oasis's videographer at the same time, because the two of them obviously clearly don't marry massively well together. But before I get to that, I wanted to ask you, do you think that this is that Coldplay, one of the first bands to have their career documented in this new kind of smartphone era? You know, because in 10, 15 years' time, every band is going to have filmed every bloody thing going because it's so accessible.
Well, I suppose so. I mean, the funny thing is, at least I'm speaking from personal experience, I don't know what it's like for you or anyone else, but generally speaking, I film everything now, but I'm much less careful with it. And so, you know, for example, my dad got sick and he died of Alzheimer's, and I filmed everything, and I was sort of thinking, maybe I could turn it into something. And then one day, I drove off in the car with my laptop on the roof.
Oh my God.
And lost it all, and none of it was backed up, and it was just mental, you know. So I think a lot of times, we were very lucky in this case, because the band have a friend and part of the crew, a guy called Matthew Miller, who not only has been shooting stuff himself, but hangs out with them all the time, is always around, is always taking photos, and is always cataloguing it. And he must have some space, a bit like the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yeah. Huge warehouse somewhere out in, I don't know,
buried in concrete in Nevada somewhere, yeah.
Well, exactly. And he keeps it all. So anything that we ever shoot, I just give to him. And even all the early tapes, he just hand them over. So we just gave him everything. And he's been filming ever since as well. So we kind of would dovetail. Yeah. And then there's another friend of the band's who's also been doing videos with them, Marcus Haney. So when I wasn't around, he would shoot, and we kind of, so more than anything else, more than ever on any other film really, it was a collaboration. But yeah, it was, it's tricky because we're shooting more and more, but we're kind of less and less careful with what we do with it. All those old tapes were kind of gold dust. I kind of knew that we had something there.
I suppose it's kind of like we don't go to Boots anymore to get the films developed and kind of sit there excitedly waiting for them to come out. Yeah.
Well, the same with music, I guess. We value it in a way less. I mean, I try not to, but you know, I have access to the entire recorded history of music at the moment on my phone, like most people on the planet, and I only listen to the same 3 albums.
Yeah, always the way. Well,
pretty
Coldplay clearly.
yeah, on occasion.
There's one moment that you must have just wept with joy as a filmmaker for, where there's a very young Chris Martin, still with the braces in his mouth, still kind of like this weird white boy afro going on, right? Where he stares straight down the barrel and he says, in 4 years' time, we're going to be one of the biggest bands in the world. Yeah. And then the graphic, the chyron comes up saying 4 years, 3 days later, and the headline in Glastonbury. As a filmmaker, you must have gone,
oh, it's madness. But the funny thing is, well, I mean, there's lots of things to say about that piece of footage. One was that it was part of a much bigger sequence in the film, and then inevitably, as it all becomes compressed, we lost all the context. And the context was, it's kind of remarkable anyway that he managed to pinpoint their biggest moment, arguably ever, the kind of the turning point where Michael Eavis gave them their really big break, and they became Coldplay, almost to the day. But not only that, they'd just done the gig of all time, which was at a farming college. And they were supposed to be on, they were supporting Space, who were on, they were like, you know, the big band at the time, or one of the big
yeah.
bands, and they were supposed to be on it, supporting
So
them.
still at the time, that would have been a big
Big
gig
deal.
for Coldplay.
Yeah, it was
you
a
know.
big deal for them, but it was a farming college, and
Yeah.
they were on at 5, then they were going to be on at 6, then they were on at 7, then 8, and then finally they went on at midnight, and it was just me and Chris Williams, who's a very good friend of all of us, who were the roadies. That was it. There was an empty room, and I remember them being devastated, but then in the end just kind of embracing it. And then after that, Chris kind of goes, we're going to be the biggest band, just watch. It's like, that self-belief is ridiculous. And the other thing is also having shot it, and then having kind of stuck it on the shelf for ages, one of the editors was going through and he said, oh, this bit's good. So he was showing me. I was like, who filmed that? I was like, no, that's you. So enough time had passed that I'd forgotten. And I said, well, we better put a date on it. And what is the date? And then what could we cut to next? And it's like, what was 4 years, just for sake of argument? And the fact that it was literally the moment they stepped on stage in Glastonbury is unbelievable.
Insane. And you touched upon Chris Martin's kind of indefatigable kind of like self-belief and drive, which obviously, you know, there's no disputing that for a band to get as big as Coldplay have got, you know, and you cited Radiohead, you cited U2, and there's a moment in there where Chris is doing a Venn diagram and kind of jokingly taking the piss out of the manager for kind of being so calculating. Right. But I was watching that, I was thinking, yeah, but there's a bit that's real.
For sure.
There is a bit where I'm almost certain from watching this that the band have sat down and gone, right, REM did Monster after Automatic for the People, U2 did Acting Baby after Rattle and Hum, Radiohead did OK, you know, where they have, I'm not saying kind of in a bad way, but quite calculatingly worked out how do we become the biggest band in the world, and then kind of like put the blinkers on and not stopped until they got there.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it's funny because again, there was another longer section in the film where they talked about exactly that. So they've headlined Glastonbury now, what, 4 or 5 times?
Yeah.
And the last time, say it was number
battered.
Yeah, so the one before, they came off stage and Chris immediately, as he was talking to Phil, he was like, right, okay, I've got it now. I know what we need for the next one. So that bit didn't work. We need to do that. And so he planned the set list.
For the next Glastonbury.
Including songs they hadn't written. So that's the song we were missing. I know that this bit, we have a lull, we need this. And so he was already thinking that way. So I went to film them. They went, him and Phil are kind of students of film, of music, of kind of like music geeks. And they went to see U2 on the Joshua Tree tour, so I went and filmed them there, and they're there sitting there, oh God, so that's what we need at this point. And I'm sure U2 do it to them too, you know, but I think it's...
Well, I saw U2 at the O2 and Noel Gallagher was stood behind me and you could see him kind of like, okay, it's a bit kind of like, so
that's how you do
it's like bricklayers looking at someone else's wall. You know, it's like, oh, I get
it's an amazing thing. But there's, like you say, I don't think there's anything cynical about it at all. It's just like, you know, the same way that I watch films and I'm sitting there going, you feel inspired by them. You're not sitting there kind of going, oh, how can I rip that off? You're thinking, what an amazing achievement. You know, and it drives you. You want to push yourself further. There's
a point through the film though where Chris's perfectionism is muted at being quite a big problem.
Sure. No, I think he's an amazing person. Like, he's a very extreme character, and he's found different ways.
I mean, he exhausted me just watching the film. I don't know how. I mean, he looks like a fantastic, lovely guy, but Christ,
he's intense.
He would wear me out.
Well, his highs are higher than anyone else's, and his lows are lower than anyone else's. And he gets up in the morning and immediately he's writing songs, and he'll wake up. You know, he writes songs at night. He barely sleeps still, and he's constantly write 2 or 3 songs every day, and then one of those might go to the band. But his process and his work rate is unbelievable. But he doesn't consider himself a workaholic. When we were talking about it, he's like, no, but if it's something you love and you enjoy, it's not work.
Yeah, it's kind of, if you're Chris Martin, what else are you going to do? Sit at the piano and just tootle away, aren't you?
Yeah. But I think, the first time I met him back in the halls at university, I didn't know what to make of him. And I remember Guy was like the same thing. I've never met anyone like that. He's super intense, but in a lovely, kind of gregarious way. And he'd come in and he'd immediately be talking to you as if you'd known each other forever, and be asking you all questions about yourself. And I was actually talking to someone just before I came in, and they were saying, so we just describe a bit of his personality. I was saying he's very generous. Now, what does that mean? And I said, well, for example, I remember he was obsessed with Reef in that first term. Reef were again, like a big band at the time.
Friends of Virgin. Reef were one of the first bands to play live for Virgin Radio.
Right, well, there you go. And we all loved them, but he was obsessed, and so he managed to get these tickets for them, and he was trying to convince everyone else to go along. So he managed to drum up a group of about 20 people all to go along together, and I tried to get tickets, and they'd sold out. And he only found out as they were heading off to the gig, and I was just like, oh, well, look, never mind, I'll come to the next one kind of thing. He was like, oh, do you know what, just have my ticket. And he was kept on pushing it to the point where it was almost an argument. It's like, no, take it, honestly, I'm not going. Right, that's it, I'm tearing up. He desperately wanted me to go, and he hasn't really changed in that way. So he's very, very extreme, but in a lovely way.
I mean, if Reef are watching this now, they're going to, like, let's put on another gig.
Sure, but I think there's something, it's funny, because like you said, they get a lot of flack, and they get flack partly for being big, partly for being writing emotional music or whatever it is. And I think it's interesting seeing the effect that they have on other countries. So we filmed them in India, filmed them in South America.
Yeah, in Thailand as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And people are in tears from the first chord. I mean, it's unbelievable. And okay, fine. I mean, you can like them or dislike them. That's subjective. But I do think that there's something, and I have it myself, and I certainly had it growing up, particularly, where you're desperately trying to. You've got this kind of thing that you do, you slight kind of air of cynicism, and it's like you can't really let yourself go. Yeah. And I think in other countries they don't care, they don't give a fuck. They're just like, fine, I love it.
That's a very British thing though, isn't it? To be reserved, and to have someone like Chris and someone like Coldplay songs, and I Will Try and Fix You, and all of that kind of stuff, which is just like, whoa, hang on a second,
and it's not cool as well.
Stop writing songs for funerals.
Well, we had a section on cool, what it means to be cool, and then being slagged off in part of that bit where they're being slagged off by all the press. And I remember Chris getting. Now he's much more kind of like, hey, that's fine. Everyone can think what they want. But back then, this was around the time of Viva La Vida. Yeah. Him just going, look, what is this? That's not our ambition to be cool. It's like it's got nothing to do. We don't care about being cool. We never have. So you can't have a go at us for not achieving something we're not achieving they're aiming to do.
It must have been such a weird position to be told by, I don't know, 30, 40 blokes in London writing for magazines that you're not cool, but then every night to be going out to 70,000 people in tears. Yeah. You must be going, well,
I know.
A, are you sure? And B, why do I care?
Why have I got Kanye and Robert Downey Jr. on speed dial and you haven't? Yeah, I know. But that's not cool. I wouldn't mind being not cool.
So Matt, I mean, filming a lot and being kind of taken along for the ride, you seem like a very grounded kind of guy.
This is a very thin veil.
But there
must, an illusion.
But there must have been moments where you're just like, yeah, I'm just filming Beyonce recording a vocal here.
Well, you know what? That wasn't me actually. That was Rick. That was Chris and Rick. So I think it was relatively spontaneous how that came about.
Yeah.
They, as you do, the Jay-Z's come over for a drink, and
I wish they'd stop. Or at least phone ahead.
Knocking on the door. It's a bit like Pete and Dud with a Greta Garbo banging on the. Yeah, it's that sort of thing. So anyway, they pop over, and so they fashioned some makeshift studio up in his son's room. But I think that, again, when I saw that footage, Chris, I asked Chris and Guy particularly, who often do film, like Chris is often shooting little bits, almost as little kind of memos to himself. He'll record things and he'll film things constantly in the way that he used to use his notepad. Yeah. And Guy is a great photographer and also loves filming stuff. He's quite faddy, so you'll bump into him at one point and he'll be, oh yeah, I construct airplanes now, or no, I do this now.
He's got to have a thing.
He's always got a thing, yeah. And from time to time it's filming. And on the second album, he filmed everything. Like he shot hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. So a lot of that stuff is his. And then on this last album, I was like, did no one think to document any of this? Because I was around for some, but I was busy on Supersonic and other things. Yeah. Come on, there must have been someone in the room when Beyonce was. Did you take a photo or something? He's like, no. And then Guy was like, oh, I've got some footage, and then pulled out this hard drive full of all this amazing material. And similarly, I mean, some of it which we couldn't include just because of time, because of the Super Bowl and all that kind of stuff backstage, which he shot illegally. But if you're a guy,
the Super Bowl stuff was brilliant.
Yeah, it's really lovely. And then Chris similarly was just like, oh no, we just don't film. Oh, hang on. And there's like Lauren. Who's one of his assistants. Oh, can I have a look at my computer? He pulled out his computer and had meticulously shot and catalogued everything. Yeah. So that's the moments with Noel and with Beyonce. Those were shot on Chris's phone.
Were there any bits that you had to argue to get in the film? I mean, there's a really tender moment of Gwyneth singing backing vocals at one point, which I found quite touching.
I did, because I think anyone who's been
because they're so private.
Yeah, of course, and I think they've now got to. I guess they've now got to a stage where it's like they're a family still, despite the fact that they're separated. So I guess
consciously uncoupled, man.
Consciously uncoupled. That's right. Yeah. So I think one of those things that you end up having is something they're kind of much more open about now, and I think it's lovely that they're willing to allow us to have that footage and just kind of say, look, this is how we live our lives now. I mean, I think so. I didn't talk to Chris or the band really about any of that stuff until very late in the day. So Phil always acts as their eyes and ears, and I think he was initially super cagey. And I remember the only time I really had any discussions with Chris about it early on, he was like, look, we're never going to allow this film to be made. We don't want a film made about us. We're not interested. And every year I'd revisit it going, yeah, you sure? We shot quite a lot of stuff. No, forget it. And then Phil only when they'd seen Supersonic, they asked me over to shoot the Rose Bowl gigs for this live stream for China, and they said, oh, and I was backstage, and I was editing Supersonic, desperately trying to finish it. We'd just shown it to the brothers, and I was just trying to put on subtitles and things, and they were, oh, what are you doing? And they're kind of looking over my shoulder. So I asked permission, and we screened it for them. And afterwards, Phil was like, oh, maybe it's time to do our one then.
Mate, how the hell do you go to Oasis and say, guys, do you mind if I just show this unreleased top two super secret kind of film to Coldplay?
Well, they're all friends.
Are they all mates now? It's fine now.
Well, Noel is friends with Chris. They all know each other. Like,
yeah.
You know, and it's funny. So when we were we had 2 premieres for Supersonic. We had one in London, one in Manchester.
Yeah.
Because this was like Liam's request, because we had a London one set up, and he was like, no, this is a Manchester thing. So they got a helicopter for him and me to go out there. And as we were flying out, he played me the new album, which was amazing. I was just like, this is great. I can die tomorrow. I'll be very happy. Yeah. And he was like, oh, do you do videos then? Have you done anything I've seen? Because thinking about what he wanted for the next album. I was like, well, I do mostly Coldplay ones, but I know you and them probably don't necessarily get on. He was like, oh no, I love them. I just like to get Matt at that sort of thing. So it was I never know. You know, I think there's a kind of grudging admiration. Yeah. But I think, yeah. But anyway, I mean, it's one of those things that when you see those 2 worlds, you wouldn't really imagine they could all be mates, or they could kind of hover in the same world. But actually, they kind of they must cross each other's paths all the time.
What's your favourite moment that you shot that we've seen
in the film? That moment, the 4 years moment, is lovely. And I think, to be honest, some of my favourite moments are not in the film, and it seems to happen every single time. And I think there's all this great stuff with Mary Clayton, for example, who's on the album, who's obviously an amazing 70s soul star. And she just had a terrible accident, so she's in a wheelchair, and they're pushing her around, and she's completely running rings around them and ordering them about and telling them, and every time they say, oh, let's go for one more take, she was like, what's wrong with that one? It was like gold dust. Yeah. But then it was like, okay, it's another collaboration, so it has to go in the collaboration section. Right, do we take out Noel or Beyonce? And then we had some Michael Stipe stuff. It's like, right, Noel or Beyonce? And so in the end, we lost it. That was probably my favourite. So
Michael Stipe got binned as well.
Michael Stipe, yeah. Bono was in there at one point. Michael
Bono's
Leavis.
Everywhere. There's enough of Bono.
There's a lot of good stuff. Yeah.
What about you as a filmmaker? So Supersonic. Head Full of Dreams. What's next? Are you going to complete the music trilogy?
Well, I'd love to. It's funny because I didn't really end up shooting music stuff deliberately, but it just kind of happened by accident. And then I've been doing political things, and then I kind of ended up doing music, which I love. But every time I do a music one, I'm like, okay, great. Well, I'll do something else now. And then another amazing opportunity comes about. So hopefully, the next thing we're going to be doing is
Kanye.
What's that again?
Kanye.
Kanye, yeah. Kanye, that would be interesting. I got approached first of all. We're finishing a film about the Bauhaus movement by the BBC, which is fun. Which is bits of music, but not really. And it's got a punk band in it. And then the next thing, hopefully, is going to be a drama about Brian Epstein and the Beatles. Oh, which is music again. But I was like, all right, yeah, okay, that's fair enough. I'll do that one.
That's a good one.
Yeah, that's a really good one. If we get to do it, I can't wait.
There's a distinct whiff of finality.
Right.
At the end of the documentary. Yeah. All through the band, after every album, oh, this is it, this is the last thing, I'm never doing this again. Yeah. And you kind of know that it's just a bit of flouncing and a bit of posturing. Right. However, at the end of the film, I genuinely got a sense that could possibly, it's certainly the end of something. Yeah. Is it the end of Coldplay?
Well, it's interesting because I think, exactly as you said, and that's why one of the moments we have a kind of newspaper headline or a pull quote where Chris is saying, right, this is the last thing we'll ever do. We're finished as a band, and it's after the first album. So I was like, okay, so you have to take it with a pinch of salt. On the other hand, and like you said, he has said it a lot of times in the past.
Mainly because you know that they've still got something left to do.
Yeah, well, I think that's true. I mean, I think the thing with them, what seems to happen, their process is that Chris particularly seems to kind of empty himself out so completely into every album. He doesn't sleep for the whole making of it, and he comes out the other end like with nothing left to say. And then gradually ideas start coming back. And so I understand that completely as a filmmaker. I feel like you feel that at the end of a project. But then this time round, it felt like he was kind of taking it up a notch and saying that this really is what we started off wanting to do, and we've done it now. Where
does a band like Coldplay go after that?
No, exactly. And is it bigger? And is it, would you go sideways? Did you try something different? I mean, the one thing they said, I'm sure they will get together as musicians again. And I know they've taken a year off as a sabbatical, which they've never done before this year, which ends end of December. So something's cooking. What that is, whether it's an album, whether it's something else, whether it's kind of, free jazz or whatever, I don't know. But I know that they're thinking of doing something together. So yeah, I can't wait to find out what it is.
What's your favourite Coldplay song?
Well, it's hard, isn't it? Because I really, you know, I'm a super
It's
fan.
hard
So
because you must be sick of them.
No, not at all. It's funny because you know, people ask the same on. Well, we did this other film, Sex, Drugs and Rock and Roll, and after that, and we did another film called Spike Island, which is partly about the Stone Roses. And so as well, each time, as everyone's like, "Oh, you must be sick of them," and I've been lucky that I've always ended up, you know, making films about bands that I really love.
Yeah.
I would say probably if you held a gun against my head, I'd probably say Politic, just because there's something about hearing that for the first time. I remember going to see them in Shepherd's Bush.
Yeah. I got taken to a listening. But when record companies had money, they did listening parties.
Right.
Yes. A listening party for that, and just hearing really
oh mate, it's such a great song, but also it's such a kind of a huge explosion after Parachutes. Yeah, it was a huge statement. I remember going to see them they'd invited us all to go and see them at Shepherd's Bush, like all the uni mates. We all turned up, and I got there late as always, and just arrived as the chords started pounding and all the lights were going up, and I just ran into my seat just as that happened. I thought, wow, this is something completely new.
And completely different magic for me as well is one that is just like, it's just one of the most cleanest lyrics I've ever heard.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. And that's the thing. It's like, you know, obviously I know them, so I'm not objective, and I can't even be objective making the film. It's like I love everything they do. I have the same kind of sense of pride every time I hear something they're writing or putting together in the studio than I do, you know, as I do when I see my kids do a drawing. You know, who, by the way, are like, you know, they're 3 and 4.
But that's them. That's what they're like. You know, that wasn't put on.
No. There's nothing put on about them, and that's the thing for me. It's like, you know, whether you love them or hate them, they're just so completely honest.
Well, I think
and truthful about what they do.
If you come out of that film not liking them, then you're never going to like them.
No, for sure. But also, it's like, it wasn't my object to try and make people like them. But on the other hand, I kind of feel like and the same with Oasis, that in the period running up to us, knowing that we were making the film, so on Supersonic, it was kind of back and forth. Are both brothers going to agree or not? And similarly on this one, you know, the band really going to agree? They kept on saying no, but suddenly it looked like it was going to happen. And in both cases, I bumped into at least 3 or 4 people who were like, "Oh, why do you want to make a film about them?"
Yeah.
And in both cases, I was like, "All right, well, I'll see you at the end of the process and watch the film, and then you'll find out." You know, and I feel very, you know, obviously I love both bands. That's why I made the film. I don't really understand the point of making films about people you don't like. So in that sense, yeah, I'm an evangelist for them. But also, it's not like we made it as a kind of fan letter. I wanted it to be truthful. And if you come out of it and you don't like them, I think you're a bit of a but that's me, because I'm a friend of theirs.
Matt, thank you so much. It's been
Pleasure.
really good to talk to you. Coldplay Head Full of Dreams out now. It's on Amazon Prime. Go and check it out and just enjoy the process. If you're in a band, you'll love it because you get to see so much kind of like behind the scenes kind of studio footage, which is fascinating to watch. There are songs that you've sang and cried to, and you see the inception. It's like seeing, you know, it's like seeing the moment your mum and dad made you. It's quite
hopefully less disturbing.
Oh my God, imagine that. One day that'll happen with smartphones and it'll be your fault.
Like, if you really want to see how it happened, yeah, no, you're right.
Matt,
thank you so much.
No, thank you so much. You've been listening to Virgin Radio movie special with me, Jamie East, and a Coldplay Head Full of Dreams, making Mat Whitecross.
The best music all day. Virgin Radio.